Coast Guard heroes arriving in the Abaco Islands.
5 young boys create a rescue trampoline.
The first to run a marathon in under 2 hours.
We have seen what we thought was unseeable.
A relay of dogs will lead blind runner Tom Panic across the finish line.
Nicolas Mahut lost in the French Open, but then his 7-year-old son ran onto the cart to give his dad a big hug.
Her and her sister have been heroes for many little girls out there.
I want to thank my amazing mom. She's my hero.
I love
you. Exactly what I was thinking.
When you are free to be you, it is the best feeling in the world.
He's the Sully Sullenberger of pizza.
My family is making a grant to eliminate their student loans.
We know deep down what's right and what's needed.
I'm gonna fight this.
Who says I can't? Nobody!
Here it comes. Never been done in competition.
The category is love, y'all. Love!
Use your heart, your courage and vision to fix, to heal, to empathize, to connect. Because living life for something bigger than yourself is a hero's journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Power Up Hero Show. My name is Liza and I couldn't be more excited to be your host of this amazing show where we share stories with you about how you can be a hero in real life. Because let's face it, juggling a busy workload and living your best life can be close to impossible. And I'm sure some of y'all feel like you have to pull superpowers from who knows where. And so today, I'm hoping that as we're going through this show, you get an opportunity to learn about how an amazing, celebrated leader in our community is truly being a hero, how this person is on a heroic quest as an agent of change, making things happen. So as our world needs more heroes today, it's more important for us than ever before to elevate and shed a spotlight on people who are on heroic quests. As you know, this show is all about being a power-up hero. It's about being a strong, celebrated leader in our community. But we also want to make sure that we're nominating people with stories to share, stories of resilience, stories of accomplishments, and stories of overcoming things that are unimaginable so that we can all learn how to live full lives in our community. Today, we are elevating the spotlight on an amazing individual. And as I introduce this person, I hope you will be able to take a step back and learn more about what it feels like to truly be part of a community and do everything you can to support the community. Today, I am proud to introduce you all to our very own Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford. Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford grew up in rural Oklahoma in a homogeneous community of 1,600 people. She was clueless to its lack of diversity, y'all. Its lack of diversity, and she could not spell, define, or pronounce homogeneous. She used Pell grants and scholarships to pay for college, where she was a social justice student. This is where her social justice consciousness came to life and has continuously challenged and refined her. She graduated with a PhD in communication studies in 2006 from the University of Iowa. Today, Amy is an author, professor, and associate provost at Texas A&M University-Corpus Christi. So if you're like me, you're an Islander. Go Islanders. Texas A&M is a Hispanic-Serving Institution of 12,000 students in South Texas. She's the past president of the Central States Communication Association and has been honored with many local, state, and national awards, including University Communication Educator of the Year in both Texas and Oklahoma. Amy lives with Jean, her spouse of 15 years, and their 7 rescued pets. ladies and gentlemen, every single person who is watching today, I want to welcome our Power Up hero of allyship, Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford. Welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. And I was just telling you about how the weather has shifted here in our community, and it's getting it's super rainy and cloudy. And I love this weather. It's like a good change.
Oh, I love it too. As I was telling you earlier, I love the little rumble of thunder.
Yeah.
But we know in Corpus, we better hope it doesn't get too windy because we could go dark on the show real fast.
We could totally go dark. I was totally telling you, I was watching The Day After Tomorrow, which is like a movie from God knows when. And when it started raining this morning, I was like, oh my goodness, are we having climate change issues? So yeah, so I'm super excited that the weather has aligned with how I feel. I feel like change is inevitable, growth is optional. And so we want our flowers to grow, then we must have change. We must have the rain. We have some fans. I want to thank Suraida Nanes James. Welcome, Dr. Amy.
Oh, hi, Suraida. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, so we're most excited to learn from you. And I know we have a lot of information to share and learn all about you, Dr. Amy. But today, I just want to let you know how excited I am that you accepted this nomination. We know that you have done amazing work in the community. And not only that, we know that when we think about the definition of a celebrated change agent, we know we're talking about people like Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford, and I affectionately call you my Dr. Amy. So I just want to first of all say thank you for being the human that you are, and congratulations on being our Power Up hero.
I appreciate that. It's been a long journey, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of that. I've made some mistakes along the way, and I've also had some really good teachers and continue to.
I love it. And that is truly what the heroic quest is about, right? You learn where you leave. It's almost like you leave the comfort, and almost when you leave the comfort, you know things aren't going to go right, but you learn from them, right? And you become who you are. So let's get started with learning about it. I do want to bring another person on. Thank you so much, the digital resident, for joining us on the show today. And we hope that you will continue to join us on the show and put your questions in there if you have questions for Dr. Amy. So Dr. Amy, we can get started right away with finding out about Dr. Amy and how Dr. Amy grew up. I want to find out about you when you were a kid. Like, tell me about your childhood. Tell me how you grew up.
Gosh, my family is 5 generations deep in this great state, what is now Oklahoma. It's a young state. It's one of the younger states. I have an affinity for the state of Oklahoma, particularly the northeast part. And I'm actually traveling back there this next week. I'm fully vaccinated and very excited to go back and see some folks and also participate in the 100th year commemoration of Black Wall Street. So it'll be good to be home. But I was born in Muskogee, Oklahoma in the mid-'70s, and there is a famous song, Okie from Muskogee. I was born just a few years after that, so I've heard that term my entire life. I stayed in Northeast Oklahoma for all of my education through my first master's degree. And then I was offered an opportunity to go to the University of Iowa to get my PhD. And that was a real awakening for me. And anyone who's read my book is fully aware of the awakening I had at the University of Iowa. Basically, my former roommate from Oklahoma when I was in grad school chose to wait until I lived 600 miles away from him to come out to me as a gay man. And I didn't handle it well. And he separated himself from me over the years. And let me tell you, he's an incredible person. I mean, the good news is we are friends again. I will see him while I'm home, and I'm in constant communication with him. But we did lose contact for 10 years because I was toxic for him. I recognize that now. And it made me have to really put a mirror up to myself and say, what's going on with me that I would treat someone from a marginalized identity. I didn't have all this vocabulary then. But while I was at Iowa, I developed the vocabulary, and I had to start thinking, what is it about me that I would treat someone like this? Someone who's struggling anyway and is going to be continuously marginalized probably his entire life. If you remember, equal marriage was not legal, then. This is, around 2001 to 2006, that kind of that era. And I had to really start doing some self-reflection. And it started with the LGBTQ plus communities. It continued, right? I mean, there were things, probably the community I understood well was women, and women being marginalized, particularly in leadership and education. So I developed that knowledge a little bit more. But I'm really a believer, and you mentioned this earlier, about being uncomfortable. I think it's super important to be uncomfortable. I think that's when you're learning, right? Yeah. When you're in that discomfort. And so I've continuously just made myself uncomfortable, as an educator and an ally. So I dive more and more into learning about communities I don't know about. I'll tell you right now, I'm really focused on transgender and sports, in high school sports, because we're seeing that come up a lot. So I'm doing my own education in that area so that I can have my own stance and can have my own fight in that space. We see what's happening with Palestine and Israel. I'm having to do the same thing there as well, right? Educate myself. And I try to do that better globally than I used to do that, which I'm sure you can appreciate as a person who's integrated to this country. And so I think that's all really important. But my education definitely started around LGBTQ plus communities and being a better ally to my friend. And it's grown from there.
Wow. So I asked you about your childhood. And wow, we totally went into, what can I say, Black Wall Street. I need more information about that. And then also talking about your friend. And, so as we're talking through who Dr. Amy is, where you have been, you mentioned a book. We are going to talk about the book in a little bit, y'all. So stay tuned to hear more about this book that is just hopefully going to make it on the New York Times bestseller list soon, because I think you've been on every show talking about the book, so you better get on there now. But one of the things that I did want to ask you, though, is, Amy, when you were growing up as a young child, right, what made you go to college and study what you studied? There's got to have been something that happened that made you feel like you needed to study what you studied.
So all of my degrees are in communication and or education. So I have 4, college degrees, and all of them focus on those areas. I was very fortunate in that I really liked public speaking, and it was a good outlet for me. I didn't have other talents. I was not into sports. I was not a musician. I did some singing at church, but I don't think I was that great at it. I think I just liked being up in front of the church. And so I really liked talking. And in the 8th grade, I had a teacher who is still living, Mrs. Lynch. She just recently sent me a message about the TED Talk. That was exciting to get. I got a little video from her son made for me. It was wonderful. But Mrs. Lynch was my, what we refer to as home ec then. She was my home ec teacher. And she told me about a speech contest that was upcoming. It was sponsored by the Oklahoma Farmers Union. And I could pick a topic, and I picked soil and water conservation because you kind of had to stay within a framework of topics. And I went and I gave that speech. And I would like to tell you my first speech was incredibly successful. It wasn't. I placed 3rd out of 4 people. My mom went with me, and she handed me my typed speech as I got up to give it. And I had it memorized, but I took the typed paper with me and then ended up reading it and the whole thing. So it didn't go great. But when I got back to school, Mrs. Lynch, who was not able to go with me on that contest, I mean, she typically did, but I can't remember why she couldn't, but she couldn't. And she asked me how it went, and I told her, well, I got 3rd out of 4. And she's like, it didn't faze her. It was just like, okay, let's go to the next one, sort of a thing. And by the end of that year, I was a national speech champion. And I got 3 perfect scores out of 3 at the national contest. Wow. And in DC, it was my I think it was the first time I'd ever been on a plane. And certainly my first time in DC. My family did not vacation like that. Yeah. And so from then on out, I couldn't compete in that contest the next year because I was still in the same age category. So I took on a local leadership role. I'd always been my class president and stuff, but I started expanding be on my class presidency. I think I was the chapter president for that organization as a freshman, as a first year high school student, and just kind of, I ended up being student body president, and I'm still pretty connected to my former high school. I graduated 43 people.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a good experience. It was an homogenous experience.
Yes.
And, that's always my concern looking back, is how do we keep that from continuing to happen? I mentioned Black Wall Street to you. I did not learn everyone in Oklahoma, just like Texas, was required to take state history. We're very proud of our state, right?
Yep.
I didn't learn about Black Wall Street. And, you'd asked earlier about that. I mean, that was a genocide of hundreds, perhaps thousands of Black folks right outside of Tulsa that happened just 100 years ago. And if you watch The Watchmen, that show is all about what happened there in Greenwood. And so I didn't learn that. Most Oklahomans did not. We've only in the last 20 years have unburied that history.
So I feel like every time we're probably going to ask you a question, there's so much knowledge that needs to be unpacked in the question. So I'm just going to very swiftly start asking you questions about who you are, so that we can start learning, right? Because I don't want to take away from who Amy is, but I also want to learn from you. So I want to tell you who else is here watching. We have Leticia Wilson, who is super excited that you are on the show. And by the way, I don't know if you could hear my phone, and I apologize if you all could hear my phone. Usually I turn my phone off, and for some reason it's Sunday, I didn't turn it off. My phone is blowing up because you're on right now, Dr. Amy. So thank you so much for being on the show. Everyone's like texting me because you're on the show. And so we're super excited that you're here. So one of the things I did definitely want to ask you, though, is so you went through this, I guess, situation where you had a teacher who kind of showed you a way, right? So then you found out that you loved communications. So when you went to college, you decided that that's what you were going to study. And then how did you go from communications to social justice?
Well, I always knew I wanted to be an educator. And so actually my undergrad degree was in speech education. And then that first master's degree was in school administration, because I also love the leadership, right? And so I never formally studied social justice while I was at Northeastern State University in Oklahoma. I just had some really great teachers who were, as Leticia says, raining down some knowledge on me. And I was kind of picking it up, not necessarily right then, but with reflection. When I went to the University of Iowa, that's where social justice was more infused pretty directly and pretty unapologetically into the curriculum. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that even though I was a communication major, there were a lot of women's studies students in my classes. And because they had a more hybrid degree that picked up from a lot of different areas. And so I would hear their conversations, and I would hear who they were reading, and I would then go read those things and try to learn more about the concepts they were talking about. Then when I got back to Northeastern State University as a faculty member, because that's what happened, I went back to my alma mater to teach. I started infusing those things into my curriculum as a speech teacher, as a communication teacher, because I reflected on my experience at Northeastern. And while it was a fantastic experience, I wouldn't trade it for anything. The thing that would have made it even better is if I would have had more social justice knowledge. And so once you know something, you can't unknow it. And so I had to teach it. It was like, it was an obligation. It was a moral obligation for me to teach about LGBTQ plus communities and their struggles and their celebrations, about Black folks, Indigenous folks, especially Indigenous folks, because that's the heart of the Cherokee Nation is where I lived, right? About women, about a number of things I hadn't learned, not in direct ways.
Yeah. And one of the points that you made that I definitely want to bring up here is the fact that there probably is a need for history to be spoken about and educated in its truth, in its facts, right? Because I think what I'm hearing now as that social justice movement has happened, right? I think we are in a global consciousness. Like when I was introducing you in your bio, I felt like your bio was kind of like where we are now, right? We're in a global social consciousness, and you went through that. But I almost feel like, why is it now that we're trying to tell the truth about what happened? Like, it's almost like, obviously the people in power, right? Power has to do with who tells the story. But why are we now in a space where we're wanting to tell the truth of what happened? And also, Dr. Amy, if you can even maybe answer this, why is it important to tell the truth of our history?
Gosh, I mean, that's a question that gets asked a lot, and I'm going to go to the same answer a lot of people use, because I think it's important. I mean, one reason we do it is because we don't want to repeat the mistakes of our past, right? And that's the answer gets used a lot. The other reason we do it is because we need to validate what people have said, people who have been dismissed, and we need to let them know they've been heard. Now, some of those people are no longer with us, so we can tell their descendants, that they're heard, and that's what's happened with Greenwood and the 100-year anniversary. Some people who survived that genocide, they don't know what's happening now. I mean, some of the last survivors have passed away very recently, but there are people who tried to tell that truth for many, many years, and no one heard them.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that's another reason why it's important to tell the story. Now, it gets harder and harder to tell the story the more people in power get scared by it, right? And we're seeing that happen in legislation across the nation, where people are trying to stop us from telling the truth. There are people who just want us to speak about U.S. American exceptionalism, and how we've overcome things, right? Like slavery. That's an example that gets used a lot. They want us to put a positive spin on slavery. I can't do that. I mean, slavery still affects us today systemically, right? And in generational wealth and the lack of it with certain folks, right? And so I can't act like it's done and we should move on. It's irresponsible to do that.
Yeah. So I think at some point there just needs to be an understanding that when you're talking about social justice, even though you were intentional about creating the opportunity for students in your classroom to learn about social justice outside of the scope of speech or communication education, that I believe then it should be part of like the skills that students learn from the beginning, right? It should be part of curriculum from K through 12, right? There should be some sort of a social justice movement in terms of education.
Oh, I certainly believe that. And we're seeing more and more elementary school teachers infuse it into their curriculum. There's some countries where there are, and it may be so in Kenya, Lisa, where social empathy is just part of the everyday. Understanding another person. I think this is really common in more collaborative spaces and more collaborative cultures in countries and in geographic regions, where you're taught to look at other people's experiences and really learn to empathize with their histories, and maybe not their lived histories, but the historical trauma that has followed for generations. Where I grew up in Northeast Oklahoma, I already mentioned the Cherokee Nation. It had a big influence on me. I didn't recognize it when I was there. It took me to move away to understand it. But it's something that the Cherokees talk about, and I think this is true for the 500 sovereign indigenous nations in what is now the modern day U.S. They always consider 7 generations. They always think 7 generations back and 7 generations into the future. And that takes the focus off the I and me and the now, and I think that's really important if you're going to do social justice work.
Wow. There's so much we can unpack in that, because there's that program, right, that talks about the 7-7, like you really do have to pay attention to 7 back, 7 forward, and pay attention to the implications of your decisions, right? The way you make your decisions, how is it impacting what you have learned from your 7 generations? And you said you're 5 generations strong, right? So I guess that's a matter of trying to track, right? Where do I come from? Where am I? Who am I, right?
Yeah.
Story of who you are.
And I want to add, because I think this is important. You know, 'cause you and I think that land acknowledgements are very important. And I think, something I want to say about Indigenous folks is that's why they've always been the leaders in environmental justice, because they understand the importance of the land and the water. 7 generations back and 7 generations forward.
And it's critically important to recognize that. And then, so one of the other things I wanted to ask, and for those of you who are watching right now, you're probably seeing the comments that are coming in. So I do want to bring in a comment that came in from Leticia Wilson. She asked a question about the difference between speech and communication. We will address that. And then talking about validation being important. But one of the things I want to bring up here, though, is that as we're talking about validation, right? As we're talking about recognizing that the life we are living now is not necessarily what should have been promised as it should have been, right? And I think there just definitely needs to be an opportunity for the world to recognize the truth of our true world history. Does that make sense? Like, I almost feel like where are we gonna get to when we have truth in conversations, right? And I know everyone says fake news or whatever's going on, there's probably a group of people who probably think that why are we talking about this anymore, right? Why haven't we moved on? Why are we still stuck on this, right? But it's almost like we have to unpack what happened to be able to move on. Do you agree?
Oh yeah, we like I said, we have to, like, Leticia mentioned, we have to validate and really pay attention to what's happened in our history. And because I really believe it, and you're hearing more people talk about systemic issues, right? It's so ingrained in our laws and our rules and our policies and our housing and our policing that we've got to talk about what happened in the past so we can fix some of those issues and move forward, with a better future. And just because you've had a charmed history, and your history is reflected in the textbooks, that doesn't mean that's the only history there is, right? There are people's stories who are not being told. I mean, we look at textbooks and good luck finding information in most of those textbooks about real slave existences, and what it meant to do that every day, to live that every day. When I wrote my book and I wanted to write about Mexican American civil rights, that tiny piece of my book, I think it's like 3 pages, took me months. Thankfully, I live in South Texas so that I could physically travel to places to learn about those places, because otherwise, I don't know where I would have gotten the information. A lot of it was oral histories. A lot of it was just seeing the geography. We've got to tell more of those stories. And in my book, I did a horrible job of the AAPI communities, with Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. So just pretty much left out of my book. And that, in looking back now, I recognize that's a convenience thing. It wasn't easy to find. I would have to work really hard. I will for the 2nd edition. I commit to that. But I also recognize I dropped the ball on the 1st edition of the book.
And that brings me swiftly into a question about your heroic quest that you're on, right? And I think as we talk about all the things that we do in our lives, we have to recognize where we've fallen short, right? And I think this swiftly talks about how, as a hero, you recognize where your gaps are, where your areas of opportunities are, where your weaknesses are, right? Before we get into that, though, I want to ask you, as our PowerUp hero of allyship, what would you say that your superpower is? Where do you get your strength? And when we talk about allyship, and I just want to pause real quick, and if you don't mind, Dr. Amy, I want to just kind of speak a little bit about allyship. And so the word allyship, you can find it in the dictionary. And when I think about the word allyship, it's about being a support system to somebody who is marginalized in whatever community they're in. There may not be a definition to what that demographic of that person is, but whatever community they're in, if they are the marginalized community that does not have the equitable opportunity, you being an ally, you being a friend, you being a support system is really what an ally is. That's what allyship is. But it's about action. It's not just about saying, yes, I support. It's about making sure that you are aware of what interventions or micro, I guess you could say, interventions you could have that would support that community as necessary. And so I want Dr. Amy today to just share with us a little bit about why we are calling her the PowerUp hero of allyship, because one of the things that I have seen Dr. Amy do, which I really think that every PowerUp hero needs to do, whatever you want your superpower to be, this is what you need to do. You need to be in support of who needs you. When we hear Batman is going to support somebody, Batman's not thinking, oh, what do they need and why should I support them? Batman is thinking, how can I use my superpowers to support that person? Superman's thinking the same thing. Wonder Woman, Aquaman, whoever, all these other mythical beings that we think about, they go into the line of fire thinking about how can they use their superpowers to do that. So as we're talking about allyship, I want you to see yourself as what Dr. Amy is, because I truly believe that allyship is a superpower that every PowerUp hero should want to have. We should all want to be allies for anybody who has been marginalized in any community, whether it's women or we're talking about gender, sexual orientation, whatever it is, we have to make sure that we are a support system for everybody. So Dr. Amy, as we are unpacking you as the PowerUp hero of allyship, can you just share with us maybe what you think your superpower is? If you were to wear a cape that was like, I am the PowerUp hero of allyship. I don't know how the PowerUp hero of allyship shows up, but how would you show up? What would you be your superpower?
Well, it's funny you ask this because, an attribute that an ally should have is humility, right? And so when you ask this question, it goes against all that. I would say, it goes back to something we talked about earlier, this social empathy piece. I think that's something you're going to have to really become good at, to be a good ally. Because if you can't see where people are continuously being oppressed, then you're really not going to be any help in the social justice movement, because that is just like the first thing you got to do is see that there's a problem, and to really have social empathy and to quit blaming marginalized people for their marginalization. I mean, we see that so often, right? Every time a police officer unjustly shoots a brown or black person, you'll see people blame the oppressed for their oppression. And that's not social empathy, right? And I'm not talking about feeling sorry for people. I'm talking about understanding the predicament, the situation, the history, right? That has caused this current event to happen, right? To really dig into that, maybe even generations back, right? And so I would say, that's probably the most important, that's my superpower. I'm certainly working on some other attributes I want to be better at, such as being humble and more self-reflexive. I think both those things are really important. And Lisa, you hit on those when you talked about allyship. It's not about going in to save anybody. It's about showing up, paying attention, and being a friend, listening to the community and what the community needs, and not getting out front and telling them what they need to do, right? But also being ready when they say to you, hey, we need an able-bodied person, because let's say you're working in the disability community. We need an able-bodied person with power to do this, to make this statement, to write this opinion editorial, to be on a mic at a rally, or maybe they just need someone to be in the background and pick up trash after the rally. Whatever. I mean, that's what an ally does.
And I have to point out that one of the things that I learned from you was that, first of all, we know that you love speech communication. And just very quickly, can you define the difference between speech and communication?
Yeah, so for the longest time, the discipline was referred to as just speech. We've made that transition in the last 20 years to think more about communication, because speech really just embodies kind of the public speaking part of communication. And we do far more than that. We do interpersonal, we do small group, we do organizational, and we do public speaking. So we want to just include all those things under the umbrella communication or communication studies.
So I'm going to give a little bit of like a, I guess you could say, what do people say when you're giving it away before the movie has even started? Like, what are you doing? You're ruining it.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. There we go. So I'm going to give a little bit of a spoiler alert. So if you don't know this, Dr. Amy has actually been a TEDx speaker. So if you know what TED is, then you know what Dr. Amy has been able to accomplish. So she has been a speaker on a TEDx stage. And this is actually a picture of her watching herself watch her talk for the very first time. And I have a surprise for you all, because we're going to watch a little bit of a talk that Dr. Amy has done. You can find it on the TED.com website, but I want to share just a portion of that talk. And during a portion of that talk, she talks about how the allies to the character, I guess you could say, of her TED Talk were being supportive by literally just taking care of that person's children, you know, giving that person that mental space to be able to go do what they needed to do. So as we tee this up, Dr. Amy, are you okay with us sharing a little bit of your TED Talk?
Sure. I noticed I'm wearing the same denim shirt because it's what I go to when I'm cold.
Oh, there we go. There we go. You know what? Everybody has their go-to. And can I just say something? You know, everybody talks about how successful people don't pay attention to their, you know, needing to change things up. If you're comfortable in this, and that's what you wear, right? So I'm glad that, and I'm sure people have probably seen me wear this a lot. This is my Sunday outfit. So let's go ahead and play the TED Talk, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
It was a Sunday evening in early March 1965, and Viola Luiso from Detroit, Michigan, was settling in for what was sure to be another busy week as a part-time nursing student, wife, and mother of 5 children. As she and her husband Jim were settling in for the evening, they turned on the late local news and learned that hundreds of voting rights protesters had been tear gassed and beaten in Selma, Alabama, where 50% of the citizens, but only 2% of the registered voters were Black. In the coming weeks, Viola would attend a local march and rally, and she would hear from activists who had been in Selma. And she decided right then and there that she had to get to Central Alabama, that she had to be a part of the solution. So she packed a bag early on Tuesday, March 16th, and asked her friend Sarah to watch her children. She decided she wouldn't tell her husband Jim about her plans until she was in Selma. So she got in her Oldsmobile, pointed it south, and began the 800-mile drive, all by herself. Once she arrived in Selma, she did what was ever asked of her, from nursing people's wounds, to babysitting their children, to taxiing people.
Everybody who's watching right now, you have just finished watching Dr. Amy's little snippet of her TEDx talk. We are celebrating Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford, who I affectionately call my Dr. Amy, as our PowerUp Hero of Allyship. And as I bring Dr. Amy back on, as we watch this TED Talk, she was just unpacking how an ally is somebody who is a support system for others. And so, Dr. Amy, we just literally saw you give a TED Talk. Oh my goodness. How does it feel to be on the TEDx stage when, first of all, you said you loved speaking when you were a kid? So this kind of feels like the level of speaking that any speech lover would want.
Well, talk about empathy. I developed empathy for people who compete in speech and debate again, because I hadn't memorized a speech in 20 years. As you know, I give a lot of speeches, but I always have an outline and a lectern, right? And so this was a challenge, but I'm so glad I did it, and I'm so glad to have done it with friends. Leticia, who you all see popping in, is one of the speakers. And then, Tracy Anderson Tejado is another really good friend of mine who did a great speech. And the three of us are going to be making some presentations this summer together. And so that's going to be very exciting. And then I met four new friends actually from the event here in Corpus Christi. So I just loved it. And Lisa, I want to give you some credit. Lisa is a TEDx organizer, and she's the one who put it together. And it was just a pleasure. It was a real pleasure to do it. But it was a challenge 20 years later to memorize even a 7-minute, I guess 5.5 minute speech.
And you know what I can say here is that, like, I was there physically while you gave the talk, right? So we've gone through COVID. The pandemic has really changed the way that we do TED Talk productions. So this was a talk where I was there and there was just a few people in the audience while we recorded the talk. And you did this in one take. I know you did it twice because we've done twice for the videographers, but this was the first take. Like, you literally did the first take and it was perfect. So I think what I want to unpack here is, like, we're talking about you being the power-up hero of allyship. You told me that your superpower is not only empathy, it's social empathy. And so as we're thinking about that, I always think when I'm hearing the power-up hero stories, a lot of stories about power-up heroes, it feels like your superpower shows up when you're struggling. So tell me a little bit about, where did you figure out that humility, empathy is important? Why? Like, if you had your 12-year-old self or your 15-year-old self or your 18-year-old self, like, why would you tell them to focus on social empathy, humility? Why?
I think it's always been in me. I grew up extremely poor on public assistance. And, as you mentioned, I went to college on a Pell grant. And back then it would basically pay all your school. I had some scholarships too, so it actually helped pay for my living expenses and everything. So I was really fortunate. And I grew up in the church, and I can sometimes be hard on organized religion, particularly evangelicals. But I am one, right? I still am, I'm a Christian. And I think that I learned many concepts from the Christian Bible, which also goes into a lot of the other biblical texts from other denominations and religions. But I learned some concepts there about social empathy, and the Jesus that I know is very much a social empath, right? Mm-hmm. And so I learned all that really early on. And I think that carried with me as I went through college. And I recognized I was going to be a person who was going to be middle class or better, right? I wasn't going to have to worry about money like I did as a kid. We moved up to 3 times a year because we were running, I imagine we were running from paying bills, would be my guess. And so I knew that was going to happen for me. And I do live a very comfortable economic life now, and a job that doesn't require a lot of physical labor. I have a lot of conveniences and privileges, but I've never forgotten working class Amy. And I still very much feel like I am a working class PhD, if you will. I give away a lot of my money to nonprofits and things I believe in and people I believe in, right? Because I've never forgotten that. And I'm grateful for that upbringing. I'm grateful for my parents and what they modeled for me, and my little brother. All that still affects me. My brother still is very much working class and lives in the same community we grew up in, and he definitely keeps me grounded. If anybody does, it's my little brother. And so I think a lot of that plays into who I am now. And then that experience with Rusty, my friend who came out to me, and I do have permission to use his story and his name. When he came out to me, and I was so horrible to him because of my church upbringing and my particular denomination, that was a moment where I had to find some social empathy and be better. And that's really what I've tried to focus on. Another gift that has been given to me, and Lisa, you're a part of this gift, is I've often lived in spaces where I am the racial minority on paper, right? I lived in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, which is Cherokee Nation. And I live now in Corpus Christi, Texas, which is a largely Hispanic, that's a self-identifying term in South Texas, Hispanic, a large Hispanic population. And so I've been very fortunate in these spaces to have true friendships, not the kinds of friendships some people have, but true friendships with people who've allowed me to see into their lives. And, I've got to say, and, Lisa, as I mentioned before, you're an immigrant. You're an immigrant Black woman experience is different from a domestic Black woman experience, as you and I have talked about. So I get to watch that through you. And I have my other friends, some of them are with us today, and they allow me to see into their lives in ways that I imagine they've tested me, because I imagine other people like me have hurt them. And I'm just really grateful that they remain vulnerable and willing to give people a chance. And it's only because of that I'm able to develop more empathy, more social empathy, because it's not a read story, which I think reading and educating is important. But at some point you need true, authentic friendships. And I've been fortunate to have those. And that's a gift. Right. Rusty gave me a gift to let me back into his life and let me see how he lives every day. Right. That's a gift. And I'm very grateful for that, as an ally, that people allow me into communities of which I'm not a member.
And Dr. Amy, you're a professor at the university I went to. Right. Right. And so what you just said is like the first time anybody has ever said that, because like there was times when I came to the university as a student when I just immigrated and the professors just didn't get it. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I oversee international education at the university now. And you didn't when I was there. Right. Right. Like I was there before you came, and I guess, was I there before you came? I can't remember. I've been at the university since 2013, but I moved into the international role in 5 years ago, 2016. Mm-hmm. And Lisa, I was there in 99, so I started at the university in 99. And you've been a part of the movement at our university to make sure international students are heard. We're really proud of you. We talk about you a lot and we bring you back a lot. And I just want you to know you're seen, that you've been a large part of that. And I pay special attention to Kenya because of you. I have a relationship with a young schoolgirl there in Kenya. And I always think of you when I work with her, and I'll just say, since we're talking about international students, I definitely don't want to gloss over that. I think it's important to pay attention to international student story. And, we're not talking about one story. We're talking about, 200 plus countries that we need to pay attention to and recognize how tough it is to be an international student on a student visa. But then also for people who choose to go or have the opportunity to go on a work visa or stay in the U.S. in any other ways. Mm-hmm. It's often not an easy journey, and it can be pretty scary, especially if you don't think your federal government, where you currently live, wants you there, right? That can feel very frightening. Mm-hmm. And so we get letters, so I'll never forget when there's letters you get where you feel so disconnected. But then even then, I just have to tell you, Dr. Amy, your comment right now has touched me greatly, because I feel like the university is a better place because of you, right? And I guess the opportunities that have been presented as we're going. But I guess I'm getting emotional because of the situations that have happened to me when I was a student when I first got there. And I guess the international office just didn't get it. You know what I mean? It's just you just don't know anything. And you're brand new and you're Black. and I'll never forget, the sport I played was definitely not a sport for Black people, right? So I played golf, and it was just a completely different thing for me when I came here. In Kenya, we're all Black people playing golf, right? And so we're not trying to navigate our race, right? I didn't even know what race was, right? And so when I got here, it was just so different. And then in the classroom, nobody wanted to talk to me because of my accent. There's just all these things that happen. And I think for me, we need more Dr. Amy professors who, outside of the scope of the lesson you're teaching, have some empathy, you know? And so I see you as being like a catalyst for every other student that would come, that would be like me as an 18-year-old who doesn't know that they just want to be the best version of themselves, and who's there as a roadblock, right? And I mean, I don't want to like put some professors on the spot and be like, you did this to me and you made me feel a certain way. Because can I tell you something, Dr. Amy? And it's going to be part of the question I ask you next. The opportunities for you to grow and to flourish are all wrapped around hurt. They are all wrapped around failure. They're all wrapped around the destruction that happens in your life where you feel like nothing. And so the question I want to ask you, Dr. Amy, is like, as we're going through your heroic quests and you're thinking about how have you become the person you are? We are calling you a power up hero. And we know all heroes have to do with challenges. You know, I think I know what your answer is going to be. You know, what is the number one challenge that you may have faced in your life that has led you to be who you are today and to lead the path you're on? Give us some insight into that.
Well, I mean, I definitely think there's no doubt that losing Rusty was huge for me. I always refer to that as the turning point. That he and I were so close. I mean, we spent.
So Rusty is your friend who came out to you.
Yes.
And did not react in a positive way.
No, and he waited till I moved 600 miles away. We had been roommates the week before, and he had been a gay man his entire life. He had already tried conversion therapy by the time he came to me, right? So that said a lot about who he thought I was. I mean, he knew me better than anybody, and he waited for me to move 600 miles away. So that was a huge awakening for me. And so there's that. But it continues. You know, if you're going to be an ally and you're going to put yourself out there, you've got to be willing to be called out, you know, or called in. And, you know, the difference is a call in is more private. A call out is more public. I've had both happen. I've had both happen in the last year from people who didn't think I was doing enough or listening well enough to what was happening, particularly around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And I appreciate that. I appreciate, you know, those call outs, because that means they think I'm worth talking to. Right? That they think there's a possibility that I could learn, right, and be better. And so I appreciate that. You know, I appreciate that people would take time to do that. But it is an ongoing reflection, right? So I don't know if that directly gets to your question. I mean, I think there's hurt around growing up very poor, you know, that I can, you know, refer back to as well. You know, I'm a person who never moves, right? I stayed in the same house in Tahlequah the entire 9 years I was there. I've been in the same house in Corpus Christi the entire 8 years I've been here. And I don't move into the nicest neighborhoods. I mean, you know, I don't move into the more expensive home type neighborhoods. I'm still most comfortable around working class people. You know, that's my comfort zone. It will always be my comfort zone, you know? And so I think, you know, that is imposter feelings. I certainly had those a lot going into the University of Iowa. I spent the first year kind of paralyzed by those imposter feelings. I had very irrational thoughts around that. You know, I didn't believe I was supposed to be there. I really thought they had made a clerical error in having me there, right? And those are all systemically focused, right? Someone like me, who many people would refer to, you know, as trailer trash, poor white trash, you know, those sorts of phrasings. They aren't supposed to make it, right? They're certainly not supposed to go to a PhD program that's in the top 5, you know, in the nation. And so I have dealt with those things, and I do think they make me more sensitive, but I don't want to pretend that my journey was harder than a person who had the same circumstances, but is a darker shade, than
Yeah.
me, or is a member of the LGBTQ plus community, or is in a wheelchair. I don't want to pretend that's the same. It's not the same.
Right. And it's never going to be the same. And I think everybody lives the scope of their life, right? So I think I just want to recognize the fact that your lived experience is your lived experience, Dr. Amy. So, we have to recognize the fact that there are people in this world right now who need more help than we can even imagine, right? One of the concepts that, one of the issues that has happened globally that even today I think of it and I think, why am I not there right now? Like the Boko Haram, like the girls who were taken, and I think to myself, they're still not rescued, all of them. And who even is still paying attention to that? Is anyone still realizing that there's some girls who are taken into a forest by some group of men and who knows what's happening to them? And it's been years and years and years since the Obama administration that found out about it. And now we're still here and they're still not free. So that's just a fraction, right, Dr. Amy? We're talking about right now in India, COVID-19 has just turned into a whole other issue, right? Mm-hmm. So there's always going to be a fraction of our communities, of our world, right? We have to treat our world as our community who are more in need of our support. But I don't want to minimize your story, Dr. Amy. I think at some point we have to recognize that the lived experience you're having is a true experience and it has birthed who you are. And the goal of this is that knowing that your heroic story is what is going to be a catalyst for what happens in our world, right? I do want to point out that you do have a book that has been written and has been recognized in so many different ways. You give speaking engagements and you publish about this book from thought to action. But one of the things I want to point out here is that our local TV, I'm so blessed that I get to live in your community, Dr. Amy, and our local station loves you so much. So we're just going to take a short break and we're just going to watch just a snippet about the lessons learned from your book as we talk. We're going to come back and talk a little bit about your book, From Thought to Action. So we'll be right back, everyone.
Well, we've seen it throughout the country, ordinary citizens coming together to take a stand against what they perceive as injustice. Our Julissa Garza found some folks here in Corpus Christi who have taken that fight a step further.
Across the country, people are gathering in solidarity, whether it be marching in protests, participating in Blackout Tuesday, or starting conversations with local officials. There are many ways to share your voice and advocate for what you believe in. I spoke with a few individuals who shared their advice and thoughts to help those who are speaking out and finding their voices.
Associate Provost for Academic Affairs and Professor of Communications, Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford wrote a book titled From Thought to Action, Developing a Social Justice Orientation. Her book helps people who are new to social justice activism and are finding their way through their social justice journey. Dr. Sanford says there are 3 steps when it comes to starting your social justice journey. The first step, self-evaluate.
First is it's very important that you're being very reflective on your own journey to social justice.
Second, educate yourself.
Something else you can do at the same time is really get to know what we refer to as the other with a capital O, right? So people who are different from you. What too many of us do is we go to people who are different from us and tell them to educate us. That's not what we should do. It's their job to educate us.
Dr. Sanford says read books, articles, watch documentaries, and build new authentic relationships with people who are different from you. And the third step, take action.
The third thing is the activism piece, right? Once you've made some progress in those first 2 items, then it's time to take action.
There are different ways to advocate, to speak up, and to express your thoughts. Julissa Garza, 3 News.
I want to thank Julissa Garza for that amazing interview that Julissa did on our Power Up Hero of Allyship. I am so excited for those of you who are watching. We have my buddy, Megan Isasi, here with us. How's it going, Megan?
Hey, Liza. I'm so excited that I finally made it to the computer. I was on the road listening to you guys and telling the rain to be quiet because I had so much to say. And I was so excited for Dr. Amy to be on the show. I have so many things to tell her about how she is my hero in real life and I can't wait to get to talk more to her.
Well, Megan, before you're able to meet your hero, I just want to tell everybody else who's watching right now, we have Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford, who's a TEDx speaker, author, communication scholar, and university administrator. I affectionately call her my Dr. Amy. Feel free to do the same. But Megan, I want to introduce you then to Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford. And Megan, we just figured out that Dr. Amy is our power-up hero of allyship. And her superpower is, guess what, Megan? Social empathy.
Social empathy. That is so beautiful, Dr. Amy. On the road, while I was hurrying my way over here, I was thinking about all the things that I would say to you. And I have to tell you that as a young girl, I was always so drawn to heroes like Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez. And my favorite quote from Cesar Chavez is, "Preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect of somebody else's culture." But in real life, in today's world, I have you, and I'm so grateful for you. Like, I could cry right now.
That's so some company you put me in there, Megan, because those are my heroes too. And you're thank you. And you know, we're not trying to pretend like I don't know Megan, right? Like, I've seen I am glad to see you, Megan. I'm glad you could make it. And Lisa's done a great job, you know, on her own, but I know that she always likes to have you around, and I do too. So I'm glad you made it.
I know, it's just like a tri-fest, right?
I'm like, how am I supposed to have a show without my Megan? So Megan, we have already unpacked, and you know, this is actually the perfect segue into who's watching right now. We have Dr. Amy, who is a public speaker. She gives speeches all over this country talking about social justice issues. And the interview we just unpacked was actually talking about a book that Dr. Amy wrote, which is From Thought to Action. And so Megan, right now, what I wanted to do was unpack this book. And I think Dr. Amy has a step-by-step process, which we heard during the break. But I want her to tell us a little bit about, how did you come up with this model? You know, there's always something happens. I don't know if you wake up in the morning, you throw those covers off, and like whatever it is that happens when you're asleep, the universe gave you this idea. How did you come up with this idea from thought to action?
So I told you about how when I went to the University of Iowa, I came back to my alma mater to teach, and I had only planned to stay a couple of years and finish my dissertation and leave, and I stayed 9 years. And then I came here to Corpus Christi. So my 20-year career's been at 2 institutions. But while I was teaching those students, and some of them may be on, while I was teaching those students, and I was working in these social justice concepts, some of which I was learning about while I was teaching them, right? I found that the students were having a consciousness raising. I mean, there was no doubt. And I told you earlier about how you can't unknow once you know. Now, you can deny if you want, but you can't not know anymore, right? And so they started to recognize some injustices around them. And they started to get a little frustrated, quite frankly, because they would say things to me like, I can't watch television or movies anymore like I used to because I see oppression, I see the lack of representation. You know, they would say these things to me, or I can't shop at that store anymore, or I can't eat that fast food anymore because I now know what that corporation stands for and I can't support them with my dollars. Right. And so they would come to me and say these things to me, but in many ways they were kind of angry, you know, and they were angry at me sometimes for having told them these things. Right. But they were also angry at their parents and their public school educators and their textbook authors and a number of other people. Right. So I wanted to give them readings. Right, because I'm an academic. It's what I do. I go read when I want to learn about something, or I watch a documentary, you know, what I do. And I could point them to no one book. I couldn't find one book that had everything in it that I knew they were going through. Because a lot of them were having barriers too. They didn't know how to pick a cause. They didn't know what to do with it once they picked it, you know, all those things, right? And I kept waiting for that book to be written. And while I was waiting for it, I was kind of keeping notes about what I wish that book would have in it. I started writing articles and newsletter pieces and op-ed pieces of things that I wish were in that book, you know, and I gave talks and all this other stuff. So I just started writing the book. I mean, when I got to Corpus Christi in 2013, I was kind of at a place in my journey with research that I needed to take on something new, but it didn't necessarily need to be an academic article. I was in pretty good shape to go up for full professor and all those sorts of things. So I thought I'll work on this textbook. And while I work on it, I'll give speeches from it and, you know, whatever. And 5 years later, it was written and no one else had written the book, you know, and I didn't go out looking for a publisher. The publisher came to me. It was very serendipitous, the whole process. And so it really was for my students. So when you read the dedication, it's going to say for my forever students, because that's who it was for. And every time one of those forever students ask for the book, I write or I autograph the book and send it to them or whatever. I'm like, yep, this is who it's for, you know, and everybody else is just bonus. But I owed them that book. I sincere, and all of them have families. They're in jobs. Some of them are professors themselves at this point, but I owed them the book, you know, and that's what I did. I just kept my promise to them. And I have found that the book has been helpful to a lot of other people too. And I made a conscious decision to write it as a textbook and a book that can be read by people not in a class. I learned this week, this was really exciting, that a high school has picked it up in New Jersey. And it's the first high school I know of that has picked it up. I know of many college and graduate, you know, courses that use it either as the book or a supplemental book. But to know, to get back what you were talking about earlier, to know that they're going to be talking about these concepts, and even as a senior, I don't know what level it is really exciting to me, right? So I really believe the earlier we start, the better off we are.
I almost want to say amen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because, and I just said it, so I almost want to say what I just said. Oh my gosh, we literally just talked about how I believe that we need to accelerate the learning by taking it to where it's needed. We shouldn't wait to teach people about social justice issues, about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion until they're in college. It needs to begin from the beginning, from pre-K, from kindergarten. We need to have empathy for each other. We need to have a recognition of biases, right? We may come from families that are creating opportunities where there is stereotyping, right? And so why not, as an early childhood educator, start creating this sense of empathy within your children? And now, Dr. Amy, you're telling me your book has been picked up. You wrote it for college kids, but it's been picked up by high school kids? Wow! Can we just get a round of applause for that, everybody watching? Wow!
Round of applause to the high school administrator who's allowing that. That is great.
Oh my God, New Jersey, whatever. I don't know what Jersey says. What is the sign for Jersey? Whatever. Jersey, you're awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Megan, wow!
It is so amazing. And I love it so much because I feel right now that this whole social justice movement can quickly turn into a fad if it already hasn't, and starting them early just ingrains it within them. And so I appreciate, like you said, the administrators and everyone who's just taking this and running with it instead of letting it be a fad.
I love it. And, you know, and I think that's a challenge. So I want to challenge every educator who's watching right now. I want to challenge every school superintendent. If you are on the board of a school district or anything to do with schools that have to do with K through 12, you need to pay attention to the fact that we all have a blueprint when we're growing up. And if you can impact that blueprint at the beginning, then you're going to have what we want at the end, right? We want to have more empathetic, more social beings in our community, right, Dr. Amy? So do you think it's a challenge?
Yeah, I'm into that challenge. I'm also into parents and people who love little ones to do the same. You know, I'm the aunt who buys all the books the parents won't buy and the toys the parents won't buy and all those, all my stuff, I think gets looked at before it gets given to the child.
Yeah.
But I think it is important that we start introducing these things just as early as possible. I will leave it to the people who are experts in early childhood and elementary to help make those curriculum decisions. But social justice can certainly be taught from the crib to the grave. There's no doubt.
I love it. And we do have one of your friends actually who we just learned about. I guess Reverend Tracy Anderson Teado. She says social justice paradigm education. Boom, right there. So we definitely have a space that we can move into, an industry that definitely needs support is education. Leticia Wilson, be the change you want to see. That's why she's our hero. You are being our change. And so Dr. Amy, I love to have fun. And so we're going to have a little fun. Megan, you join
I didn't miss it. Yay.
We're going to do our Fast 5 Finger Favorites, y'all. So as we're going through the part of our show right now, we want you to share with us, what are your Fast 5 Finger Favorites as we unpack what Dr. Amy's Fast 5 Finger Favorites are. So Dr. Amy, we always start off with, what is your favorite book? If you had to read something and that was the only thing you could read if you're stuck on an island, what would it be?
My favorite classic is Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Yeah, that's the one I'd probably take with me because I've only read it once, but I feel like it's one I could read over and over and over again. And it is a really influential book. I mean, when it came out, it was propaganda to help stop slavery. It was written by a white woman. And so I appreciate that. And I think I can learn a lot from that.
Never heard of that book, actually. So I am definitely going to pick it up. So next, we're going to ask you, Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford, our power-up hero of allyship. What is your favorite movie or something to watch?
Gosh, I watch a lot of documentaries. So I think I love people's stories. That's why when you ask about my favorite book, I can name autobiographies and biographies all day long because I love them so much. Probably one of the very first documentaries I ever watched was The Eyes of Tammy Faye. And it was about Tammy Faye Bakker. And she was a really well-known televangelist with her husband, Jim Bakker, her now ex-husband, Jim Bakker, in the 70s and 80s on PTL, Praise the Lord TV. And so many people have heard of them, I'm sure. But later in her life, she developed a lot of social empathy for the LGBTQ plus communities, and you can see that play out. And her husband, Jay Bakker, is an evangelist. He's a preacher, I guess I would say. And he has a lot of social empathy for oppressed people. And I appreciate that. And you can see how that happened generationally when you know the story of his mom, who's now deceased. She died of cancer and was going through a cancer battle in the documentary.
Okay. I know that y'all are always looking for stuff to watch on Netflix, HBO Max, Prime, whatever it is. Go look for Tammy Faye's documentary. I'm going to be looking for it.
The Eyes of Tammy Faye.
The Eyes of. Okay.
It's named that because she was really well known for wearing a lot of eye makeup.
Oh,
yeah.
Like mascara and stuff,
yeah.
like all the color. Oh my gosh. So that's like my Instagram. Like, I just need to chill. I'm going to watch some Instagram makeup going on. And so, isn't it crazy how people are able to do that makeup the way that they do? I just think it's crazy.
I'm impressed. But Tammy Faye Bakker was an 80s pop culture phenomenon in the U.S. So other Gen Xers will appreciate that suggestion.
Well, let me tell you, Megan, and you probably can appreciate this, Megan. Every single time somebody shares something, it feels like I've been living in a void. I don't know, right? So isn't this so important, sharing what people's favorites are so we can learn more about the people and what is important to them?
I absolutely love sharing the favorites. The Fast 5 Finger Favorites is my favorite part of the show. And it really does have a lot to say about who that person is, where they come from, why they are who they are, why they are who they are. Yeah. And I mean, if we want to be social justice warriors, then we're going to go watch these movies that she's been watching and read these books that she's been reading for sure, because we want to be just like you, Dr. Tammy.
We do. And the goal here is that if you pick up this talk, right? So this show is all about you being a hero, and you decide, you know what, I do want to be the Power Up hero of allyship. Well, then you need to take the playbook of what Dr. Amy is playing for us right now. So make sure you read the book, make sure you watch the movie, and now we're going to ask you, Dr. Amy, what is your favorite song? What do you like to listen to? Because we know you are what you listen to.
So y'all are going to pick up a 1980s theme here. They said, I've heard that those things you listen to around the 6th grade kind of stay with you forever. So this may be true for me, but I love the song Control by Janet Jackson. I've often said that if I ever run for public office, that's a song I want played every time I go to a lecture.
Oh my gosh, and you would win just from that song. Let me tell you.
I love her.
Like, control.
You know, I talk about in the book about when I talk about my upbringing, I didn't have a lot of women in power in my life growing up, just my teachers, and they were great, but they all answered to men, you know, the principal and the superintendent and the school board. And so pop culture was everything, right? And so Janet Jackson was a huge influence on me. And then the women of designing women, particularly Julia Sugarbaker, Murphy Brown, huge influences on me as a girl. Yeah.
Well, the fact that you just said Janet Jackson, I'm done.
Oh, I just saw her in Austin a couple of years ago. She still got it.
Oh my gosh, Janet Jackson, everything. Okay, y'all. All right. So for our next Fast 5 Finger Favorites, Dr. Amy, what is your favorite quote? What is something or a phrase that you say that powers you up?
You know, the quote I go to a lot to explain why it's important to move to action is one from from Frederick Douglass, who was enslaved and fought for his freedom. And you know, he died like in 1895, so we're not talking about like ancient history here. But he would say, and he said in a speech that people in power have to be made to give up power. That it's not something they're generally just going to do on their own. And so I often talk about that when I talk about taking action, is that taking action is about making the people in power uncomfortable. I mean, you can try to get them to empathize and to change just because they're good people, but that doesn't often happen. They generally have to be made uncomfortable. And we can see that in the history of the U.S. with like laws that had to be passed, like voting rights laws that we're still working on. And it was in ADA and Title IX and all that. It was begrudgingly passed. I mean, women's suffrage we only got that by one vote. You know, it was not like people wanted to do it. It had to be made to do it.
Yeah.
72 years for women to get that right to vote, the first group of women to get the right to vote in the U.S.
Okay, I want to unpack the quote. We're not done with Fast 5 Finger Favorites, but first of all, what you said here is that people in power have to, I guess you could say, learn to give up power.
They have to be made to. I mean, I can't remember the exact quote, but I mean, Frederick Douglass didn't play. I mean, he didn't mess around, and he was very direct in his speeches. And the quote was around basically, you have to make people in power give up power. They're not going to do it willingly on their own.
I love it. And there is something to be said about power. And one of the things I have to say is Leticia Wilson has actually helped me learn more about power by sharing like infographics. She knows that I don't read. So if she doesn't send me a picture, we're not learning anything. So she sent me once this picture about what power really is. And, you know, power is really about who is being able to pull the levers, right? Who is being able to do things. But what it sounds like what that quote means is that whoever is in power needs to be okay with letting go of it to be able to be providing opportunities for everybody.
Well, ideally, they would be responsible, ethical people, right? Mm-hmm. We see that with some corporations, right? I mean, Costco, for example, does a great job of paying fair wages to their employees and treating their employees well. And the CEO takes the former CEO, I'm not sure about the current CEO. The former CEO took an annual pay of like $250,000, which is nothing for a corporate CEO at that level. He would also wear a name tag and work at the local stores. So that is very that's very corporately responsible. It's also empathetic, that he understands what it means to stock the toilet paper.
Yeah.
I think that's very responsible.
Yeah.
We see other companies who do things similarly. They donate willingly to nonprofits that support a mission they really believe in. And it's not about restricting anyone's rights, right? It's about making life better for everybody. And so I appreciate that. And those people in power, great. They're doing the right thing without being made to do it.
Yeah.
That's not true for everybody. I mean, some people in power, they're only going to do the right thing when some noise is being made or people are taking away the dollar. Then they'll do the right thing. We see that a lot with politicians, unfortunately.
Yes, and today and now, which is so sad, right? That today and now, I can't believe, I feel like we're living the reverse. It's like we're starting all over again with everything. Leticia says, wow, making people in power uncomfortable. That's when change happens. And she also goes on to say, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will.
That's the quote. That's the
quote.
Oh,
there we go. There we go.
Yeah, you looked it up for me. Thank you, Leticia.
Yes. We got you. So for our last fast five finger favorites, this is my actually favorite part of the show. I like to know how people wake up in the morning. So we're going to ask you, Dr. Amy, you are our Power Up hero of allyship. If somebody wanted to be the Power Up hero of allyship, their superpower was social empathy, how would they wake up in the morning? How would they throw those covers off? How would they meet the day?
Well, so I don't think I do my best work in the mornings, to be honest with you. I think I do my better work in the evenings. In the mornings, I cut it pretty close with getting out the door to work. I don't do anything extra in the mornings. In the evenings, though, I do try to take a walk at least 5 days of the week, and I try to do a 2-mile walk when I walk, and I listen to a podcast or whatever audiobook I'm listening to at that point. That's probably where I do some of my best work. That's where I clear my headspace and do some contemplation about the day's activities and any kind of follow-ups that I need to do. And those follow-ups may be more meetings. It may be I need to clarify something with somebody, or I need to bring somebody else on board for a project whose voice isn't getting represented. So I would say I'll answer the question if you want about the mornings, but it's pretty boring. I get up, I take my shower, I brush my teeth, I get dressed. I do watch news. I watch national news in the morning. But then I get on my way to work, and I get to work and do my thing. I've got very fortunate. I have a wonderful career that's very much aligned with my personal mission, which I think is important. And I've got great support. I've got great supervisors, and I've got a great group of colleagues, and I work with some of the best students in the world, and so I've got a great life. Then I come home in the evenings and I do what I just told you.
Whew, sounds like you have a really good life, like you just said. Chill and relaxed. So thank you, Texas A&M University-Corpus Christi, Go Islanders, for making a great work environment, because we know that strong and comfortable and productive work environments create better humans. So thank you for creating an environment where Dr. Amy can thrive, because we need more Dr. Amy's in our lives. I have to bring in Leticia, shoulder pads and leather jackets. Real Janet Jackson in control. That's right, control. I want to pull up Spotify and literally just play the control song right now. That's what I want to do. And so she's laughing, right? She's laughing about it. And so for those of you who are watching, feel free to share your questions, anything that you want to ask Dr. Amy. We do have some questions that have come in from our audience, Dr. Amy. So I definitely want to make sure that we address them before we move on to closing out the show. So the first question that came in from Leticia Wilson was, how do you keep the momentum of social justice work because it's difficult and exhausting?
Yeah, something, like I just mentioned with the daily walk. I think it's really important that you do find time for self-care. Historically, people who do social justice work haven't done a great job with that. And sometimes that can lead to exhaustion, burnout, walking away completely, substance abuse, a number of ways of coping that aren't healthy, right? And so I think it's really important that you do the self-care, whatever that looks like for you. For me, it is a walk. It is a podcast. For some people, that may sound like a horrible way to unwind, but I like it. Also, I told you at the beginning of the podcast that I'm taking a trip home to Oklahoma at the end of this month. I'm going to drive it. That's a 12-hour drive one way, but I love a road trip, and I'm going by myself, and I don't mind a solo road trip. It allows me to just think, unwind, listen to books, whatever I want to do. It also allows me to stop along the way and do unplanned stops. And I do that. I have a couple nights. I don't have hotel rooms. I don't know where I'm going to be because I'm going to stop where I feel like, I want to stop. Now, if it becomes more extreme and you're getting really burned out, you may need to step away from the work for a little while longer. I think one of the most important things anybody can do is surround themselves with people who think like them, and you don't want all your friends to be people who think just like you. You're not going to improve that way, but you do need a core group that when you're feeling attacked or unappreciated, or you're not making any progress or whatever in your social justice work, that you can talk with them and they can fire you up. That they can help you see where progress is being made where you don't see it, and I think that's really important to have that group of friends. Also, keep any notes or emails or anything you get, reviews with my book, that were kind and made me feel good. Save those, because you're going to need to go back to them at some point. Because when you do this kind of work, you're going to take hits all the time. I mean, haters going to hate, it's just the way it is. And you cannot let them get you distracted from the good work.
I love it. Thank you so much for that answer. Yeah. And then we also have Oscar Reina, who says, we have to remember to always lead by example and remember that our youth is always watching. I love that. And that kind of comes with a question, right? I think the point here is that if you're living your life, then you're creating a blueprint of how you want others to lead their lives.
Yeah, so Oscar is a colleague and friend of mine at the university, and we're both mid-career, and we're both at leadership positions pretty high up in the institution. And so I think we both understand that we have young staff and young professional staff, new staff who watch us and watch if what we say privately and interpersonally is what we do in a public space. And I think Oscar does a great job of that, and Oscar is an Hispanic man, which I think is very important for our student population to see him, to see what a great leader he is, and to see him putting social justice in the forefront. I think that is crucial for our student population at the university, and I appreciate that. And he is one of those that I go to and have private conversations, and he pumps me up sometimes when I when I need it. So it's always helpful to have those people around, for sure.
You definitely always need those people. And it reminds me of Liza when we were, at it and doing our passion. And then every now and then it's like Dr. Amy said, you just, haters gonna hate, and you hit that low. And then something comes along and whispers to you how amazing this was, or how this impacted their life, or how much of a difference you're making. And it's right back at the game again, right back in that passion, hitting and shaking those trees and making sure that you're back at it again. And nothing is more critical, I think, than having those people by your side and making sure that you're not doing the work alone, that you have people, you have a tribe, that you're seen and that you're noticed and that you're heard, and that it is making a difference, even with just the one.
Well, and I think it's important to note too that the people who reach out to you, because I think of like my college students, right? And I'm not in the classroom anymore, but I still have my students, right? And I think about the ones who do reach out to me and send a random email or text or whatever, thanking me for something I had done at a meeting or at a presentation or at a welcome or whatever. For that, everyone who reaches out, how many are there who don't say anything? You know, they feel like you're some sort of celebrity they can't speak to or whatever, right? And so I try to think about that as well. And I know that, you know, Oscar and Leticia and Tracy and many of the other people who've been on today, I know that young people watch them. I've seen it. And whether they're saying anything or not, I see how their backs straighten up when certain people walk into the room because they're watching them all the time. You know, and it's important. I talk about consistency all the time. Your words, and I learned that in church, your words and deeds have to match or your testimony is ruined. No one will have any use for you. They don't believe you.
Yep. We've talked about that a lot, Liza, when it comes to the heroic journey, how a lot of times your heroic journey is not for you. It's for all the people that are watching and paying attention and saying, hey, Dr. Amy did it. I can do it. She went through this. I can do it. Oscar did that and he's doing this. I can do that too. So it just goes right back to that heroic journey and making sure that we are doing our best to be the heroes, not only for ourselves and for our families, but for everybody who's watching.
And the transparency is important too. I'm always very honest about my being on public assistance growing up, you know, because I know some of my students can identify with that, you know, and if you're comfortable telling that part of your story, I think you should.
100%.
Oh, I can't even control myself. Control.
Janet can.
I just that text is not in my head. And I think I'll have to say something. Reverend Tracy Anderson Teato, she said something, and I can't find it in the comments. Oh yeah, there it is. Did what my father said. Yeah, that's right, Doctor Reverend Tracy.
You'll be a doctor soon enough. She's working on it.
We gotta play the song. We gotta play the song before the show ends. And so for those of you who are watching, thank you for joining us so much on this show where we unpacked our Power Up hero of allyship, who is the Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford, who is an author. She's a TEDx speaker. She's a communication specialist expert, and she's a university administration making things work in our community and making the world a better place. You are an agent of change. And so if you don't mind, Megan, I'm going to fast forward this thing, right? We talked about 7 generations back. Oh, what have they done, right? We want to find out from you, Dr. Amy, what does the future look like? Imagine yourself 5 to 10 years from now, even beyond. What does that look like for your life?
Well, I want to think about that in community. We are facing a backlash right now, and we touched on that a little bit. It's very similar to what we saw with the Jim Crow South when Black folks gained some traction after slavery, and they were being elected to offices because by numbers that was possible, right? And we saw a backlash happen in this country where new laws were passed, and there were covenants that were being put into place that weren't fair when it came to housing and all sorts of things. I think we're seeing similar things happen right now, and we've got to fight against that. We got to fight against that. Both marginalized people and their allies have got to get into the game and make sure that doesn't happen. I think once we get past this, and we will, the world's going to be a better place. I mean, I've got a lot of confidence in my own generation, in Gen X, but I've got a lot of confidence in their kids, the millennials who are now, hitting their 30s. We're not talking about, we're talking about Megan and Lisa. I mean, these are people who are grown and are starting to make salaries that allow them extra time and money to put their hearts and their dollars into causes. And so I think we're going to see more of that. And then they're in turn doing a great job of teaching Gen Z. And Gen Z, I cannot say enough positive things about that population. I mean, in that generation, what we're finding is that they're not having the same disagreements even across party lines that we have in my generation. Like, for example, and Armand and Maggie, our friends who did TEDx's, will appreciate this. For example, they no longer disagree whether they're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, whatever. They don't disagree that environmental justice is necessary. Okay, that is not a disagreement in their generation like it is in mine. Where they disagree is, how is it done? How do we fix it? Well, that's progress. I mean, at least we're not having to convince anyone there's a problem, you know. And so I think we're in for better days, you know, as the U.S., I think we're in for better days. And then that affects all of us as people, as our families, as our communities. We're all going to see better days.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yeah.
Ooh, what a vision. And you know, can I point out something? So you have actually you give presentations all the time. So y'all, I'm definitely plugging Dr. Amy. She does speaking engagements. So if you have a need for her, you need to contact her. But my point here was that you gave a speaking engagement, and there's actually a slide from one of your speaking engagements, if you don't mind, Dr. Amy, that I want to bring into the show today. So you shared this slide that is kind of indicative, I guess, of what you're talking about in terms of the future. Can you unpack this for us? Can we talk about how maybe part of our future could be part of your future? How can we create that ripple effect for everybody? Reflection, action, education.
So yeah, I share this a lot when I speak in classes and when I speak to future educators and current educators. So I really see social justice work as falling into this framework where we need to do three things. We need to self-reflect, we need to educate, and we need to take action. The entry point is reflection. You've got to do that self-reflection piece first. You've got to think about your identities, all of them, you know, the ones that are marginalized identities and the ones that give you privilege. You need to think through all those. And I mean, literally inventory them, write them down, journal about them, read about them, learn about them. I also think you need to think through other identities of which you're not a member, right? And think about any biases, implicit or explicit, you may have related to those identities. I encourage people who haven't taken the Harvard implicit biases test that they may want to go do that. I will tell you that is created by psychologists, and it's serious business. I mean, if you do it the way you're supposed to do it, you may feel a little shaky because it gets pretty primal in you. I don't like any of the results I've ever received when I've taken those implicit biases tests, but it's truth, and I need to face it. I need to reflect on it, you know, and if I have an implicit bias toward Black males, well, I need to think about why is that and what can I do to be better, right? Mm-hmm. And that's true. You can take it, I think AAPI is in there, disability, weight, all those things, body size. All those things are in there. I would encourage you to go do that as part of that reflection piece. Once you've done some reflection, then I think you can move to education. And that gets to what we were already talking about, right? Watching the documentaries of communities of which you do not live in or not a part of, reading the books, listening to the podcast, all those sorts of things. But you can't stop there. And that's what my TEDx was all about, right? You can't stop there. You've got to take action. We get too comfortable in the reflection and the education, and we never move to action. And when you start doing action, it may be some pretty simple things. It may be posting on your social media. It may be signing an online petition. It may be donating some money. I mean, it may not be something that's systemically going to really change anything, but it is making some public statements, right? Your friends and family are going to start to notice you are becoming different. And that is going to be hard at first. You're going to have to find new friends. You may have to, and this, I know this sounds serious, but I mean it. You may have to seek out some counseling and therapy because there may be some toxicity in your life. Maybe people trying to control you who didn't freak out until you started doing social justice, right? And so sometimes that needs to happen. I think therapy is good for anybody, but that may need to happen. And so you're going to do those three things. Okay. You're going to do them a pretty shallow level the first time probably, but you got to keep looping around. You got to do the reflection in more depth as you come around the second time. Your education needs to be more in depth. How can you make yourself uncomfortable? Does it mean going to the lynching museum in Birmingham? Then do it. If the thought of that makes you shaky, if you're a person who's not Black, I don't want to induce trauma on somebody who has the lived experience, but it's okay to be uncomfortable if you don't. You need to see it. You need to understand it. The big mistake a lot of people make in education that I want to warn against, and we talked about earlier, do not go out and make a Black friend. And my friend Tracy talks about this in her TEDx. Do not go out and make a Black friend and make them your Blackspert, right? Or go out and make a gay friend and make them your gay Google, right? That is not their responsibility. No one wants to feel used in a relationship, but it is important to make friends with people who look different from you. But you don't need to go and ask them a bunch of questions. You can get that from reading and watching all the movies that are out there, right? And also, your one Black friend doesn't know the Black experience. They know their experience, right? And so it's important that you have lots of Black friends, lots of LGBTQ plus friends, lots of friends with disabilities. I mean, that's all important, right? And then the activisms can become more extreme the more times you go around as well. And I think that's important, that you're constantly making yourself uncomfortable, and you're constantly challenging yourself, and you're constantly doing better. That's the thing. Do better if you want to be a good ally.
And your friend,
Reverend.
Amen.
Yeah, I like when I get an amen from my friend Reverend Tracy. It means I'm on the right track. I like that.
First of all, thank you, Doctor. I keep calling you Doctor. You need to get your doctorate. Dr.
He is.
Tracy, Reverend Tracy Anderson Tejado, who we're so excited to hopefully one day feature on our show. Just dropping a hint right there.
Good idea.
We're so excited that we have an opportunity to celebrate people who are amazing in our community. But most importantly, I love that, we all kind of play off of this part of being part of a community of learners, right? So it's not like you know everything, but it's a matter of just, I think what you said was the opportunity to do something. It's not that the fact that you know it, it's like, I think you said something about, and I don't know why I'm not finding it in my notes, but it was about before you even knew exactly what to do, you were teaching it. So it's like the teaching was also part of your education, right?
Yes. I sometimes say I was probably a dangerous educator back then because I wasn't that many steps in front of my students when it came to social justice knowledge, but I knew it was important for them to have the information. So I just kept learning more, and I started teaching classes that were really focused on certain social justice aspects. And sometimes you learn right along with your students, but I wanted them to have the best.
And I found the quote, teaching is part of learning.
Yes. I like how you featured yourself there, Lisa. That's great.
That's how we do, Dr. Amy. You know how we do here? I'm trying to be a robot over here, okay? Trying to figure it out. Man, we have been talking for a long time. This show is supposed to be an hour show, and we're already like literally almost 2 hours. So, Megan, how do you feel about this show? What excited you about this show so far?
I think y'all know when I came on, I was just excited because I had been in the car trying to get here and listening, and all of that anticipation was building up. And I'm just so excited that we're talking about these things. I'm so excited to say that this is not a fad. This is something that she lives, breathes, eats, sleeps. I mean, the whole shebang. She is the real deal. The real deal.
Yep.
And I am just so excited to know her. And I was looking at that slide and I noticed it said evolve beyond allyship. That was like mind-blowing to me. What does that even look like? Because allyship is already this huge like calling, and it's an amazing calling, and it's an honor. Evolving beyond allyship. Oh my gosh.
You two are such good interviewers. You pay close attention, both of you. You're asking good questions. I haven't been asked some of these questions before. That's very good questions. So you'll hear some people talk through vocabulary about allyship, and they'll talk about accomplices and advocacy, and they'll use all kinds of different words. I'm not terribly interested in making the vocabulary too complicated. I mean, in my book, I talk about how important, it's chapter 3, I talk about how important it is as a communication scholar that I don't make something too hard to access because of the language. But I do want to say that a lot of folks really like the terminology co-conspirator or accomplice when they're talking about allies. And that's really getting to the point of, and at least if you get Tracy on, I bet she would talk about this with you, but it's really getting to the point of where they're not just hanging out, the allies aren't just hanging out and watching and cleaning up trash, right? But after a rally, but that they're really doing something side by side and taking risks. That's what I believe a lot of folks in marginalized communities would like to see more of.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Okay, so in the interest of time, Megan, I am so sorry. We have to kind of end the show. I'm so sorry. So in closing, I just want to ask you, Dr. Amy, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, there's a number of ways. Probably the easiest way for people to remember is Twitter, AA Sanford on Twitter. I'm not super active, but I do check my messages there so I can connect with you there. I'm also easy to find on Instagram and my email address at the university. If you just type me in Texas A&M University-Corpus Christi. Oh, there it is right there. You can find me and we can speak there as well.
Yeah. And I also wanted to ask, okay, so here you are kind of getting ready to give a talk. How can people get in touch with you for talks? Is that the same way? They can go to your email?
Yes. They can just email me or come to me through the DMs on Twitter. I do watch all those platforms and can connect with you that way.
Through the DMs, y'all. Through the DMs.
I know there's some way that, yeah.
There's a way that they do it, right?
Yeah, there's some way I'm not supposed to talk about DMs as well.
When people say the word sliding into your DMs,
I think that's a bad thing. Yeah, I don't want to say that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your book. How can people get your book?
Well, if people are interested in supporting a local business, I would encourage them to reach out to Made in Corpus Christi. Nikki there is a friend of this show and a friend of ours in our community, and they have signed copies. They have a couple of copies right now. Amazon also, if you want to use a big book distributor, Amazon is another place that you can get it pretty quickly as well.
Okay.
And then of course the publisher's Cognella. Cognella. For those of you who are educators and are thinking about using it in your classrooms, you probably want to go to Cognella and work with them because they'll give you a copy to review for free and talk with you about how to get it for the classroom. And it also has instructional resources for those of you who want to use it for class, which would include PowerPoints, discussion questions, assignments, syllabi, those sorts of things.
Love it, love it, love it, love all of it. Megan, wasn't this an amazing show? I feel like we learned so much from you, Dr. Amy.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I'm a big fan of both you and appreciate so much what you do for our community and just feel very fortunate to get to have this conversation with people who understand the local geography when I talk about it. So it's great. So
before we leave, I have to tell you something. I definitely want to get my Janet Jackson on. So love it. I love it. Oh my gosh, Dr. Amy. First of all, you brought Janet Jackson. Oh my gosh. Okay. And then second of all, you brought social empathy. Wow. We have heard people using the superpower of empathy, but you brought that social aspect into it. So that's about all of us having that recognition of that we are part of a community, right? So having that empathy of what our community needs us to be, and not necessarily putting a pinpoint on this is what my community needs. Learning who your community is so that you are who your community needs you to be, right? Oh, exactly. I love that. Exactly. And I didn't talk about the difference between social and interpersonal empathy, but I'll just say real quickly, the social aspect is really important because it is about being part of a collaborative. It's not about just picking out one person in a marginalized community and saying, well, I like that person.
That's that whole my best friend is black thing some people do. No, you're talking about one person. You're not talking about a community. And we need to talk about a community and how we treat a community, not your one friend who you think is exceptional, you know, in the community.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Love it. I don't know why I have to say love it 3 times, but yes, I love it. Oh my gosh, Dr. Amy, it has been such a pleasure interviewing you. I know we already went through how people can get in touch with you, but I just want to remind everybody that Dr. Amy is heavy on Twitter, so you need to go to A Sanford on Twitter, connect with her there. But also, Dr. Amy is the associate provost, right?
Yes.
Associate Provost at Texas A&M University-Corpus Christi. Go Islanders. Amy.aldridge.sanford at tamucc.edu. Go Islanders, go Durs, go everything alumni for Texas A&M University-Corpus Christi. Love our island university, which, by the way, if you are looking for a university, we are the only university that's on an island, on its own island. So, yeah, I will let that just sink in right now. So if you're looking for a great experience, you need to be on your own island, just like we were at Texas A&M University-Corpus Christi. Dr. Amy, thank you so much for your time today, and congratulations on being our Power Up Hero of Allyship.
Thank you so much. I appreciate both of you. Thank you for this opportunity.
It was a pleasure, and you are always welcome on the show. So whatever you have coming up, if another book is coming up, if another, who knows, another TED Talk is coming up, we definitely need to have you on the show. We would be more than welcome to celebrate you.
Thank you.
Megan! You made it, Megan! I just want to hug you, Megan. Oh my gosh, Megan!
I'm so glad I made it, even if it was for like the last little bit. I was like, I have to get there.
I know. Okay, so let me unpack the comments. Letitia's like, triple threat Janet Jackson. Whoop! That's right. We know Janet Jackson's amazing. And then, why did I get married and Poetic Justice, yeah. I still love Janet. Letitia is coming strong today with all of her comments. And Reverend Tracy's like, I'm here for the lip syncing. You know what? Let me tell you something, Megan. I can't really sing. Okay, so there's like genes in your family. My sister got the one where you can sing on note. I always have like that little like croaking that happens in your throat when you're singing.
Croaking?
Yeah, something always happens. There's always this weirdness that happens, and it's like, that's that note, and I just can't get there. My sister can get there.
That is so funny.
Lip syncing challenges where like literally we have people on there, and like the favorite song comes on, and they're like totally doing the song, you know?
Yeah.
That's me. I'm a lip sync genius, I guess you could say. I love lip syncing, so let's just say like I love lip syncing. So yes, we definitely need to bring Reverend Tracy on. And Reverend Tracy, if you come on the show, we will have a lip sync battle. So if you book yourself on the show, we will have a lip sync battle. And Leticia was jamming. And so I can go on and on. We had some amazing people on the show today, but Megan, you were not here when we also talked about the different generations. So we have.
I heard a little bit about the 7 forward, 7 back. I heard a little bit about that.
I thought that was interesting because you know what's interesting, and I found it so strange. I actually have in my yearbook. So this is the Power Up yearbook. I was literally taking my notes in my yearbook, and which I do every week. But I have a page in here that's about talking about which generation you're in. Because I realized a long time ago when I started to map out my generations, Megan, it started like every generation I would unpack further, it gave me power. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so who would have known this? My dad, so that's my first generation back. My dad grew up as a Kenyan young boy earning 5 shillings a day as a caddy for white settlers in golf. He couldn't play golf in a country where he was born because white settlers came and they wouldn't allow him to play golf in his own country, right? So he was just a caddy. They couldn't allow black people to play. And then I went even further. And then I learned about Wakingongo, who is my great-grandma. Wakingongo was actually not even her name. Her name was Angeshimu. And her name was given to her because Wakingongo was the name of a prison that she was put into so many times for defying the laws of the British. Because so they started to bring this tin roofs, like thatch roofs. Like I guess we used to have thatch roofs back in the day, and she wanted to have like roofs, like proper roofs for everybody, and there was resources for it, but they wouldn't allow the local, I guess they would say primitive indigenous people in our community to have proper roofs because that was more British. So only the British homes could have a tin roof. The Kikuyu homes, or the British, the indigenous homes, I guess you could say, the Kenyan homes, needed to have thatched roofs, right? Crazy. So that's walking on. And I mean, I have tried to go further than that, and I haven't been able to, and I'm trying to figure out who my other ancestors are. But can you imagine, Megan, when I found out who Waking Ngongo was and how many times she was put in prison for defying the laws of trying to bring a better way of living to our community, and then my dad fighting for us to be able to play golf in our own country? How dare I take this chance I have been given for granted? Like the path I am on, the platform I am on has been laid. The foundation is so strong, right?
Yeah.
So now imagine Dr. Amy has 5 generations mapped. Imagine the power she has.
And that's why she keeps saying, do better, right? Because knowing those generations behind you and then knowing what's coming in front of you, it makes you want to do better. How could you not? It's just like you're saying right now, like, how can I not? I can't just like lay around and do nothing. Knowing that my dad did this, knowing that my great grandmother was doing this, and now here I am, and I need to do better.
I know I've heard you stories about, like, maybe your sister, people who have been put in situations where they had to rise up and be the best version of themselves, as literally speaking up for the community that they serve, right? Whether it's by skin color or just literally just the way people are representing themselves. And so even you, Megan, hopefully, like, this is really the testament to the fact that you have to map out your legacy. Like, it's not something to be taken easily, right? I know when you did your 23andMe, it was enlightening.
100% it was enlightening. I found out that I was 57% Native American, and it was just completely life-changing, because here I am, like, immersed in this Hispanic culture, and there's this other part of me that I had no idea, and till this day I'm still trying to dig and research so that I can connect with that part of me, because it's important. And I think that doing better and becoming better allies and evolving beyond allyship is the way to do it. And I think that when Dr. Amy said that what beyond allyship looks like is taking risks, it kind of like slapped me in the face, like, hello, Megan, like, wake up. Because I think it was not that long ago that we were talking about everything that was surrounding Asian hate. And I finally came out and said, okay, you guys, like, I laid it all out, and I was like, this is enough. Like, it's so simple. It's so easy. And why? And that was my risk, because I was, for a long time, it was like, why should I even say anything? Like, to me, in my head, simple. What are we doing? It's so simple. And so I decided no more. Like, I am going to be taking those risks. I am going to be, exploring this thing of going beyond allyship. And it may be simple to me, but there's so many people out there who it's not so simple for. And that's why we need to do the things that we're doing now.
Exactly. And I love the fact that, you kind of segued into Raymond Chong, who is our friend, right? Dr. Raymond Chong. And he did bring on an opportunity for us to learn about what he has done. And so for those of you who don't know, you can go and watch the Power Up Hero shows at www.poweruphero.org. There is an episode with Dr. Raymond Chong, and he talks about how he has mapped out his generations. And I can't remember how many generations he is able to map out. He literally went physically and mapped out in all the different regions of China, of his country. And it was important, because I think what happens is when you realize where you come from, you don't take the opportunities you have today for granted. Because we all probably have that feeling of maybe falling into the trap of, well, I'm good right now. I'm good. Why do I need to stir the pot, right? And it's like, no, you don't even know where we should be if we knew what we were before. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like we really do necessarily, we have to be the change we want to see in the world. And I know that's a quote that's seen everywhere, but we have to live our life that way. We have to live as heroes. We have to be the hero that we would want to come for us when we are possibly the marginalized.
Yep, exactly. I love that little last piece, Liza.
Yeah.
Because eventually, at some point, you may experience it, and it will change your life completely, or even just being a witness to it.
Mm-hmm.
I've recently had an experience where my friend saw what was happening to me, and they were just like, "What?
Yeah.
What just happened?" And it was real all of a sudden. All of a sudden, it was real for them because it happened right in front of their eyes to somebody that they cared about. And so even just being a witness to it.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a organization called Holla Back. I don't have the link for them right now, but they're called Holla Back, HOLLABACK, and they're actually right now doing a series of trainings about bystander intervention. So Megan, I'm actually gonna just pull up their link because
bystander intervention.
Yeah, and so what they talk about is like what your friend did for you is kind of give you an opportunity to feel heard, because sometimes when we're like in a marginalized community, when there's not another face that gives you that look, even, right, he or she may not, or whoever they were may not have said something, but even if they give you a look of, I know, I'm with you, that's a little bit of like, oh, I'm not going crazy right now. That did happen, that means something. So I'm going to drop it in the comments. So for those of you who are watching, I'm dropping the link in the comments. I love this organization. It's called Holla Back. And so they're actually actively right now doing courses and sessions free on bystander intervention. And so what that means is that not only are they teaching you to be a support system, an ally, but they're teaching you ways that you can either disrupt, or you can destruct, or you can literally be a voice for somebody who needs a voice in a certain situation. So they're doing trainings right now, and they're absolutely free. So when you said that, it just made me think of how we all need to have an organization like Holla Back in our backyard.
Yes.
Yeah, they're doing a great job. And so thank you, Holla Back. We love you. We love you so much. Okay, Megan. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, Megan.
Thank you, Liza. I cannot wait to see you guys very, very soon.
Yes, we are going to see you next time when we have another hero. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for joining us on the show today. My name is Liza Wisner. I am the host of PowerUp Hero, but I'm most excited because I get to share stories and learn from all the heroes that we have on our show. If you want to find out more about the hero that we just celebrated today, you can go to our podcast page, which is poweruphero.org. Again, that link is poweruphero.org. And if you know any hero in our community that you would want to celebrate, go to our podcast page again and nominate them. It's www.poweruphero.org, because we want to share stories about people who are being bold, who are being positive in the face of adversity, and people who are being heroes in our community. We want to share their story and learn how they are being heroes so that we can be role models for each other in our community. We hope that you were inspired. We hope you are educated, and we hope you were encouraged to be a Power Up hero. Wherever you are watching right now, we hope you will hit that subscribe button. So whether you are on YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Stitcher, we are even happy to be on Amazon Music. Thank you, Amazon, for recently featuring us as a podcast, and also Alexa. So if you want your Alexa to play the Power Up Hero show, just ask Alexa, play Power Up Hero. So anywhere and everywhere that you tune in, watching or listening, you can watch or listen to the Power Up Hero show. We hope this show has really inspired you to be a hero, not only for the community that you serve, but for the teams that you're blessed to serve with, for our families and friends, for our own careers, for ourselves, because the world needs more heroes today more than ever before. I want to thank Megan Isasi for joining us on the show today. I would not be able to have this show be as much fun as it is without Megan Isasi. But again, I wouldn't even have it even further be amazing if it wasn't for you all who join us on the show every single week. So we thank you so much for being here today, and we hope you make today a powered up day. Bye.